Thank you, Barney. Thank you very much for your candor. And keep all those wonderful items from your personal lecture treasure trove coming. I've enjoyed them immensely. How much?
250,000.
Cornell, I got a check for $250,000.
Hello?
Is this Clarice? Well, hello, Clarice. I've been in a state of hibernation. I need some action, Clarice. I need to come out of retirement and return to public life. I couldn't help noticing on the FBI's rather dull public website that I have been elevated to the more prestigious 10 most wanted list. Is this coincidence, or are you back on the case?
How long can a man stay silent before he returns to the thing he does best?
I'm giving very serious thought to eating your wife.
Hannibal.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Underrated Series. I'm Steve Cravens.
I'm Andres Gallego, aka Galleghost.
And today we're going to be talking about Ridley Scott's Hannibal, which was released in February of 2001. Stars Anthony Hopkins, Julianne Moore, Giancarlo Giannini, Ray Liotta, and a completely unrecognizable Gary Oldman. This is a movie that has been, quite frankly, to this day, 20 years later, much maligned by Thomas Harris fans, by Silence of the Lambs fans, even Ridley Scott fans to a degree. While I do agree that it has a lot of flaws to it, while there's some things in there I wish I could change, I think it deserves a much better reputation than it's gotten over the years. And I have noticed that over the years, slowly but surely, its reputation has gone up. I mean, it's taken a while, but you talk to people about it and they seem to have warmed up to it a little bit more than they had maybe 10 years ago, for example. Normally, we kind of do these episodes and we talk about where we were the first time we saw it, but let's kind of get right in here because there's so much to talk about with this particular installment. A lot of controversial things about it, historical things about it. When you saw Hannibal, be honest, how did you think it fared against Silence of the Lambs? I mean, and also, how do you think it fares to Silence of the Lambs today? Were you one of those people that hated it when you first saw it, or did you love it when you first saw it, or were you kind of, indifferent?
Well, actually, I had seen Hannibal first before I saw Silence of the Lambs. And I had seen it this is probably not the best way to watch it, but I had seen Hannibal in a hotel room, and my dad was basically just like, okay, well, you're old enough to start watching some of these more mature R-rated movies. We started watching Hannibal, and I was completely taken aback by it. He's like, yeah, he's a cannibal and all this other really crazy shit that goes along with that. Honestly, I actually really dug the movie a lot when I first saw it. And then it was maybe about 6 months later that I actually saw Silence of the Lambs. And to me personally, they kind of, it wasn't necessarily a place of hate. It was more of a place of wow, these two films are very complementary to one another. And it actually got me, that was my first initial introduction to the character of Hannibal Lecter. And watching Hannibal and then watching Silence, that's what stirred up everything for me to go in and read the Thomas Harris books. In fact, I read Red Dragon before I ever saw Manhunter or even saw the movie that came out 6 months later.
Yeah, I mean, so I did see it after Silence of the Lambs. I saw Silence of the Lambs summer of 2004. That was the first time I saw it. And then, being a huge Ridley Scott fan, I eventually got to Hannibal. I just, again, when you're younger like that, you take other people's words too seriously. When you hear the negativity about Hannibal, and keep in mind, that was 3 years after Hannibal came out. So the negativity was still very much in full swing back then. So having gotten into Gladiator and Black Hawk Down, Alien, Blade Runner, when you hear that, oh, Hannibal's not really worth checking out, you kind of listen. And then a couple of years later, it's no, you know what? Give it a shot. Just invest the 2 hours and see what you think. And I got to tell you, I liked it from the first viewing. I didn't understand what all the hatred was about.
Yeah.
But that said, to this day, I still think it's, the inferior movie to Silence of the Lambs. But the whole reason we're doing this video is because there is a lot of great stuff in this movie, a lot of great stuff that for some reason most people just don't want to acknowledge. They think that by giving this movie props, it's like taking something away from what Demme did with Silence of the Lambs, or even what Jodie Foster did with her portrayal of Clarice, which is stupid because, you don't have to like a movie, but you can still admit that there's great things in that movie. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Or, production design, characters, role in the movie, cinematography, you name it, the script, whatever. It's hard to make all of those pieces come together. I mean, if it was easy to make a great movie, we'd have nothing but great movies. But sometimes even a master like Ridley Scott, he can't quite stick the landing on the ending, but he nails other aspects of it.
Yes.
So why don't we go ahead and talk about the one thing that everybody seems to talk about when we talk about Hannibal, which is Julianne Moore versus Jodie Foster. Obviously, that was going to be, not the K2 of, challenges for this movie. It was going to be the Mount Everest of challenges. How are you going to get the audience to buy into Julianne Moore is a fantastic actress, by the way. Really great actress in her own right. You can make the argument she's just as good as Jodie Foster, even better. But that said, Jodie Foster really made that role her own. And in all honesty, I'm not comparing George Lazenby to Julianne Moore, but it was almost kind of like what George Lazenby was up against when he replaced Sean Connery. It's like the audience is just so, they hear Sean Connery, they don't think of the actor, they think of James Bond. You might think of other roles that Jodie Foster's done, but sometimes when you hear Jodie Foster, you think of Clarice Starling. So that's what Julianne Moore was going up against. I think that she did a solid job. Her accent's kind of a little, I'm going to go ahead and say it. It's not very good. It's almost too on the nose. Whereas Jodie's was, it was there, but it wasn't distracting. Julianne's accent to me was always very distracting. And she just, as serviceable as she was for me, it makes me really, really just wonder how much better received would this movie had been if Jodie had loved the novel and had loved the script. Because that's the reason why Jodie and Jonathan Demme didn't do the movie. Yeah. Because they didn't like the book that Harris had written. They thought it was too grisly, it was too dark, it was gory. Like they thought it was a complete departure from Silence of the Lambs, and it is. Yeah. But some might argue that's the reason why it's good. So it just makes me wonder how much better would the movie have been if Jodie Foster was in the role? And I feel bad because it's kind of a lose-lose for Julianne Moore. Like she's never not going to be compared to Jodie in that role. But what do you think of her performance?
I actually thought Julianne Moore's performance in the film was completely, not necessarily serviceable, but I thought it was great. And again, because of the fact that I did not see Silence of the Lambs first, I didn't understand kind of what the hate was until I saw Silence of the Lambs, and until I saw the history making that Silence of the Lambs did, not only for movies in general, but for female empowerment films, where Jodie Foster was one of those people in Silence of the Lambs where she's getting berated by her coworkers. No one's taking her seriously. No one's following her leads or anything like that. And then at the very end, she comes up and she graduates to being an FBI agent. And it's truly one of those very inspiring arcs in a film, just for any character whatsoever. And then also on top of that, Jodie Foster had won the Oscar for this movie. The character of Clarice Starling with Jodie Foster was so intrinsically enriched in the public consciousness that it's going to be tough for any actor to replace Jodie Foster. So Julianne Moore, it was like you said, it's a lose-lose situation, but Julianne Moore, I thought, did a great job in it, in terms of portraying a Clarice Starling that is more weathered, that is more beaten down. And we see a lot of these films where we see these characters come up to the place where they want to go, where they want to end up at, but we never see the full consequences of what happens when you get up to the top of the mountain, and how do you stay up there, or how do you come down? And the film opens up with a really horrific drug bust gone wrong. And I thought Julianne Moore played it so perfectly to a T, and just showing just how much of a deep hole she was in terms of the FBI, that I thought she did great in the role, in her own right. But taking that away, it's one of those things where you can't help but just think, if Jodie Foster was in it, I think it would have been more positively received.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. At the end of the day, that's the big thing. And, there was a time there too where it looked like Anthony Hopkins was going to be in the movie, which would have been, I mean, I know they had a couple other actors, who they were looking at, like Tim Roth was one of them. But I mean, can you imagine if Anthony Hopkins didn't come back? Forget it. I mean, it just, oh God.
There's no reason to go on with the movie. In fact, so many people talk about how like, oh, you can recast actors and stuff like that. And, Manhunter did it first and then Silence of the Lambs did it. But the thing is, looking from the difference between Manhunter and Silence of the Lambs, it is a drastic difference in terms of style and in terms of tone and in terms of performance. I mean, I love Brian Cox, but there's a stark difference between the menace of Brian Cox and the utter I am 7 steps ahead of you in Anthony Hopkins, and just that sinister devil-may-care smile that Anthony Hopkins so perfectly portrays. It's a night and day difference in terms of tone that you don't necessarily mind the recast. But since this was a spiritual successor to Silence of the Lambs, that's, I think, one reason that people just couldn't get on board with it.
Well, also think about it from this perspective too. Manhunter was a box office flop. Silence of the Lambs won all those Oscars and was a massive, massive success. So when you recast Hannibal Lecter for Silence of the Lambs, it's not quite like when they cast Anthony Hopkins in the role. You're not really, pissing anybody off, except for the people who might have enjoyed Brian Cox's interpretation of Manhunter. But again, back then that was so few and far between because the movie flopped. It was, and the irony is Dino De Laurentiis forced Michael Mann to not use the Red Dragon title because there had been some movies with Dragon in the title that had flopped. It was a flop all the same. And that kind of goes to, William Peterson at the time not being a really bankable leading man, I suppose, which is, a shame because he's a wonderful actor. But yeah, I can't imagine what they would have done if Anthony Hopkins said no. I mean, they would have made the movie because obviously the book, there's a lot of hype behind it. It's the sequel to Silence of the Lambs. But at the same time, if you don't have Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, what do you have except the character? And people want to see that guy in that role. So how are you going to? I don't know who would have been able to fill the shoes of Anthony Hopkins in this case. But anyway, we talked about, Anthony Hopkins talked about Julianne Moore. Let's talk about Gary Oldman.
I'm sorry, Gary Oldman's in this movie?
Let's talk about Mason Verger. I mean, wow. There's makeup, there's prosthetics, and then there's this. And the fact that he didn't want to be credited for this is like, why wouldn't you want to be credited for this? This is amazing. Like, you are acting your ass off underneath all that makeup and all those prosthetics. You're unrecognizable. And it's such Gary Oldman, you can kind of hear him slip in there every once in a while. Not all the time, because most of the time, he does get lost in the role. But every once in a while, you can kind of hear his voice in there. I can't say enough things. And in all actuality, he steals the movie.
Yes.
He steals the movie. Every scene he's in, he steals the scene that he's in. Period.
Yes.
What do you say?
Absolutely. He's, oh my God, like, that was one of those more shocking moments that when I first saw this movie, I saw this movie when I was, I think, like 12 or 13 or so at the time. And, my dad was warning me that this might be a little extreme because he had seen Silence of the Lambs. And then when you open up the film with a close-up of Mason Verger in that face, and keep in mind, the makeup process is an additive process. So no matter how much you try to make someone look gaunt or something like that, it's always going to seem like as if you cake on makeup. This was the first time that I'd seen a movie, even still to this day, where it looks like they legitimately chipped away chunks of flesh from the actor in order to make it work, and you don't question the makeup's validity in any way whatsoever. And it's truly hard to look at for too long. Like, even like there's even from going from like, oh, the scars on his face, the scratches in the eyeball and all that other stuff. Like, it's so much stuff that you just look at and you're like, oh crap, that is an intense performance right there. And just Gary Oldman completely sings in the role. Like, he's so good. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Gary Oldman not want to be credited for this so as to not break the illusion?
Apparently, yeah. But that's what he said. But I mean, all the same, I mean, having a performance like that and not getting credit for it, I mean, I admire him, like, kind of like I think Ed Norton actually did the same thing for Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven.
Yeah.
Where he was uncredited in the main, if you look in the credits, he's there as King Baldwin, but he did the same thing where he's like underneath that mask and, but anyway, it's nowhere near the same level as what Gary Oldman does here. It's really, really unbelievable. I mean, it's also a testament to his patience too, because you just know that he must have been in the makeup chair for 5-6 hours, something like that, probably 3 to 4 to take it off at the end of the day. Probably had to show up to set at like 3 a.m. So that's testament to him. I mean, incredible performance, and also special shout out to Ray Liotta as Krenler, appropriately sleazy and scummy and whatnot, and also Giancarlo Giannini as Pazzi. I listened on the Man on Fire video I did for this series. I mean, I praise Giancarlo Giannini. I think he's wonderful, but he's great. He's good in Man on Fire. Like, he's a good supporting role in that. He's a good guy. But he is great in Hannibal. There's so many sleaze bags in this movie, and he's so good at it. And here's the thing: it's not like he's a bad guy per se, but he kind of is. It's a very murky character. He's not a good guy, he's not a bad guy. He's kind of like in between.
But he's also on the hunt for Hannibal for his own selfish reasons. He's not trying to take down Hannibal just because of, he's on the FBI's most wanted list. He just wants the money that's attached to that. So
I know, yeah. He could do the right thing and call the cops. He could do the right thing, but he's not doing that. I mean, he is a cop. Mm-hmm. He could let his own, people know about it, but no, that reward is too appealing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And ultimately pays the price for it. Before we get into some of our favorite scenes, let's talk a little bit about the difference between Jonathan Demme's directorial style for Silence of the Lambs and then Ridley Scott's style for Hannibal. So actually a quick little fun story for those of you out there. Jonathan Demme passed on the movie. Like I said earlier, he did not like the novel. He was turned off by what they did to the characters. He didn't like the excessive gore and the vicious brutality of the book. He said, this is just so different from Silence of the Lambs, and again, he said he doesn't mind different. He just thought that it was very, very sleazy, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. So obviously Dino De Laurentiis was then tasked with finding a new director to, take over for, what was essentially guaranteed to be a box office hit, but still you want a veteran presence behind there. And it turns out that Ridley Scott was filming Gladiator in Malta in 1999. So Dino De Laurentiis went to go and visited the set and, kind of asked him, hey, so what, how would you feel about directing Hannibal? And Ridley Scott said, oh, well, I'm finishing my Roman epic right now. I don't know if I want to do elephants coming over the Alps, old boy. And, Dino De Laurentiis, I guess there's a language barrier there with Italian and English. And he turned to his translator. He's like, what? Translate. What the hell? What did he say? He said, no, he doesn't want to do elephants coming over the Alps. He's like, oh, it's not Hannibal the Conqueror, Hannibal Lecter. So then he was like, yeah, sure, whatever. So then he signed on to do it. Now, Ridley Scott brought along most of, if not all of his creative team from Gladiator. He literally went from finishing Gladiator straight into filming Hannibal in Florence. Mm-hmm. So he brought his cinematographer, John Matheson, his production designer, Arthur Max, Hans Zimmer returned to score. So it almost, in some scenes in Florence, by the way, it does feel like his version of Rome in Gladiator, the way it's shot. Again, John Matheson, the DP, Arthur Max, the production designer. That world of Gladiator is still very much fresh in the Florence sequences, not necessarily the Washington D.C. sequences. But it's a very moody movie. It's very stylish the way it's lit and shot. A lot of smoke, a lot of tinted blues, a lot of reds. Obviously, there's a lot of reds in there, and I thought listen, every filmmaker that has done a Hannibal Lecter movie, minus Brett Ratner, because let's face it, Brett Ratner doesn't have a style. Brett Ratner should, feel like he even got the job. All he did was basically look at what Jonathan Demme did with Silence of the Lambs and said, okay, let's just do that. I don't have a style, so let's just do that. Not shitting on Red Dragon, by the way. It's a good remake. I like it. But still, the guy's a hack. The guy's a hack. He's a hack. He's lucky to have directed that movie. Thanks to Rush Hour 1 and 2. Anyway, so Jonathan Demme went with a completely different approach for Silence of the Lambs. My question to you is this. Which approach to the material can you imagine Jonathan Demme directing that movie the same way that he directed Silence of the Lambs? Or when you watch Hannibal, are you like, no, thank God that Ridley Scott directed this, because he really captured the essence of that book very, very well. If you think about it, like the atmosphere of the book, at least in my opinion. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And the thing is, if Demme had directed this film, I don't know if it would necessarily have held up nearly as well, because here's the thing. Demme is very much a very gritty, grounded type of filmmaker. If you look at his body of work.
Oh, sure.
I don't necessarily think that with the content that Hannibal was going into, where you have the new locations, the over-the-top gore elements, and also even just where the movie went thematically, it's one of those where, honestly, Ridley Scott is he's not necessarily the conventional choice for this, but he's oddly very fitting and perfect for it. Like, you need someone that's going to convey a different visual sense of the paranoia that Clarice is going throughout this entire film, where she sees images of Hannibal all over the place. You see the images of Hannibal in the pigeons and in all this other stuff all around the film. And I think it took someone like Ridley Scott to come up with something like that. And also in terms of going with the visual aesthetic of the violence, because I compare that. I mean, I would say that Silence of the Lambs is very much like a straightforward mystery film more than anything else. This film is more akin to what a Francis Bacon painting would be, with all the gory images and with the stylized look to it. It's not going to be someone's cup of tea, but for people that know exactly what he's going for, it's undeniably a gorgeous film. And the other thing too is that Ridley Scott also, he has a pretty interesting way of dealing with his actors, where he will let his actors rip and he'll let his actors come up with stuff on the fly that's not necessarily spelled out on the page. So Ridley is very malleable when it comes to a script and a story. And I think with a movie that needed as much finesse in the screenplay as this film did, I think Ridley was a very suitable choice for this.
Oh, for sure. And Ted Talley obviously did the screenplay for Silence of the Lambs, won the Oscar for it for Best Adapted Screenplay. And Steven Zalian, who's an excellent writer too. He adapted Schindler's List for Spielberg, among many others. But he did the screenplay for Hannibal. David Mamet took a pass at it. But in terms of, Ridley Scott has never, ever, his eye has never wavered. He's always just been one of the most breathtakingly captivating filmmakers we've ever had. Whether it's Alien, Blade Runner, you can make the argument that Blade Runner is indeed the most gorgeously shot and lit film of all time. You could make that argument. I've heard people put a now out there, Lawrence of Arabia, 2001. But ultimately, Blade Runner is just, oh my God. But it kind of reminded me of Black Rain. Because Black Rain, it's interesting how Ridley Scott can take a contemporary location like New York City or Osaka, and he can make it seem like this otherworldly kind of out of time kind of place. New York was very grounded, and then Osaka was very kind of futuristic, like Blade Runner. It's the same thing with how he handled Hannibal in terms of the contrasting ways he shot Washington, D.C. and Florence. Washington, D.C. is very contemporary, very clean, very matter of fact, nothing too stylish about it except for the opening shootout. And then once we get to Florence, it's like we're in another world. It's like, you're in this very kind of like nightmarish, but a beautiful nightmare with how he shoots it. You know what I mean? Especially the pursuit scene where Potsy, hires so we'll just call him the thief, I guess. But he hires the thief to kind of pursue Hannibal to get the thumbprint. The way that whole scene is shot is very reminiscent of Blade Runner and Black Rain. And again, I think about Jonathan Demme directing it. I'm like, man, even at the time, Jonathan Demme was in a slump, man. He did the 2 remakes of Manchurian Candidate and The Truth About Charlie after Hannibal had come out. But I was kind of relieved, actually, that Jonathan Demme, no disrespect, Jonathan Demme was an amazing filmmaker, rest in peace. But I'm glad that Ridley Scott ended up directing it, because he did bring his own style to the movie and he brought his personality to it. And I think that's ultimately why I come back and watch the movie over and over again. Not necessarily because of the performances, even though they're great. Anthony Hopkins is wonderful, if not over the top. But the way Ridley Scott films it, especially on 4K, on that 4K Blu-ray that just came out last year. Oh,
I was just about to mention that, dude. When I was staying over at your place, I had the pleasure of watching that gorgeous 4K disc on your huge TV, and wow, that movie pops.
Amazing.
Wow,
amazing.
It pops.
They did an amazing job with that. I mean, I think it was Kino that did it. They did the 4K HDR Dolby Vision. If you can get your hands on it, I mean, I don't think it's available on Apple. So, but if you guys can get your hands on the actual 4K Blu-ray and you have a 4K TV, please do so. It's worth checking out. They did an amazing job with the remaster, and the transfer is just impeccable.
Yeah, the colors pop, and then also on top of that, just also even the scenes of violence also come off as very gorgeous as well too. I mean, like going into spoilers a little bit, but Patsy's death is so bright, and it's so bright and so just oddly gorgeous that you're just kind of like, wow, this is, I don't know what it is, but Ridley Scott is kind of getting me a little too comfortable with these scenes of violence every now and again. I mean, leading from the scene with the thief, leading to the scene with Patsy, leading to even the finale as well too, where all this stuff, it's oddly disturbing, but oddly at the same time, it's just, wow, I can't take my eyes off it. And you got to give kudos to Ridley Scott for even thinking up of visuals that will complement that, because Demme, I feel that he would have turned away an audience with some of the visuals that are translated in the book.
I agree with you. Now, you mentioned certain scenes here. I was going to ask you to talk about because you're a huge fan of the series, you're a huge fan of the book. I was going to ask you that next, to talk about the difference between the ending and the movie's ending, and a couple other differences in the book, a couple of characters that were omitted. However, you brought up that scene with Patsy, so I want to kind of segue into our favorite scenes, if that's okay with you, because it kind of correlates to what we're talking about in terms of how they're shot. Just like Silence of the Lambs has plenty of great set pieces and beyond memorable moments between the actors and wonderful dialogue exchanges, there's plenty of amazing set pieces in this movie, and there's really great smaller moments that I remember and I love watching over and over again. I might sound sick for saying it, but there's a couple that I want to talk about because it's the way it was written by Harris in the book. I imagined it a certain way, and so often when you see a movie that's based on a book that you've read, oftentimes, at least in my experience, the director doesn't quite capture what you had in your mind. Mm-hmm. Ridley Scott did it twice in this movie, which is quite a feat. But I want to ask you, go ahead and give me one of your favorite scenes from the movie.
Well, one of my favorite scenes from the film, it has to be the Patsy death scene, actually. Like that one is translated so perfectly from the page in terms of just you looking at Patsy and seeing just the utter desperation in his face. And just the amount of tension that is just right there in terms of showing that Patsy's tied up to this device that is supposed to get like huge pieces of art up the stairs, and just sort of the anxiety that sort of entails when he's going up, and you're like, oh my God, what like anything could happen by this point. And then also just the stillness of Anthony Hopkins' performance, where he's like, if you understand me, blink once. And then you're just like, wait, was that one blink or was that two? And you're like, oh crap. Like, no, it captured it so perfectly. And I thought that in terms of giving us that stylized look, and in terms of giving us just small little hints in the direction, small little hints in the cinematography as to what's going to happen, I like it's one of those things where literally you just watch that scene and you're just like, that's exactly how it should be.
I agree. That scene sticks out in my mind, as I'm sure it does with everybody else, especially when he kills the two guys who come in after him. Slits one guy's throat, and then the other guy. What does he say? Like, that's the great thing about that shot.
Yeah,
is that the light is reflecting off the knife onto Anthony Hopkins' face and like to his eyes. He's like, "Good evening," and then he just slashes at the guy's throat, and the guy goes flying forward into all those chairs and creates that mess of the chairs as he goes into it. That's great. And then he just kind of like smiles and then kind of like brushes off the blood from his face as he walks away. This is actually one of mine because it is very satisfying, because we all know the monster that Mason Verger is. I love the flashback scene when he's talking about when he had Hannibal, like, Clarice comes over with the recorder. So can you please recount how you got this way? How, because you're one of the only, I think you are the only surviving Hannibal Lecter victim. And he's like, oh, well, he was my therapist. I was, touching kids and doing whatever. And, essentially saying he's a child molester. And, so I decided to have him over at my place. And, we had some wine and Ridley Scott films in that kind of distorted, kind of like out of focus thing. And then you hear the Blue Danube in the background from 2001. Yes. And just very light, and it's, it's very peaceful. And, he's like, oh, and then we had some wine and we were dancing. And then he kind of puts on that face mask and he's like, I showed him, how I hang myself and I, jerk, it feels good when you jerk off and all this stuff. And my feet were bound and it smashed into this mirror and the mirror goes on the floor. And hey, here, Mason, have a papa. And he goes like, right. And he's like, wow, I was flying. And he picks up the shard of glass. He says, here, try peeling off your face. And he's like, well, seemed like a good idea. So they just, and then they show him take the mirror and just put it right in his cheek and just start eviscerating like his face. And you see all the face muscles under there and the pieces of the face start falling onto the floor and the dogs are there and Hannibal starts feeding the face to the dogs. No, keep going. I can still see it. And come on, you can do better than that. And just seeing the dogs actually eat the pieces of face after he's cutting his face off. It's one of those things where I can't remember who said, I think it was Roger Ebert actually who says like, listen, if a guy hanging himself and then using a piece of mirror to cut off his own face and then getting it fed to dogs, if that doesn't get you the NC-17 rating, nothing will ever get you the NC-17 rating for violence. Nothing will ever do that.
I think there was a little leeway in that scene because it's like, but it's a child molester, so you know what?
Yeah. Well, that's why I love it so much. Bro, I love the way that Ridley Scott filmed it. Mm-hmm. And I love the choice of music in the background because he's a huge Stanley Kubrick fan. And let's face it, I mean, I know that piece of music was around way before 2001 came out. But still, like, when you hear that, you can't not think of 2001: A Space Odyssey, except when you think about this scene. So, yeah, I mean, he's a child molester. He's a piece of shit. And to see that kind of done to himself is great. And then, of course, like the zinger at the end of it when they show Mason in bed. Oh, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I mean, it's great. It's a great scene. It's an amazing scene. I love it. But do you have another one that you like? I mean, those two are like my picks. I have a third one we can talk about. But what about you? Do you have another one that you want to talk about?
One is the carousel scene where Clarice and Hannibal talking with each other. The other one is actually the finale.
Yes.
With the brain. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was so. In the making of documentary, Ridley Scott was talking with his special effects guys who were doing the makeup effects and whatnot, and that was kind of like the big worry. Was they knew that scene was coming and they knew it was in the script. They were going to go ahead and do it, and his makeup artist, you were like, hey. So how are we going to do this? Like, how are you going to film around this? Because there's no real way you're going to get around this and have the violence kind of cut out. Because not only is he taking off the guy's skull, but he's like cutting into the guy's brain, and then he's taking the brain, frying the brain, and then he's going to feed it to the guy. So how are you going to show this without it being cut by the MPAA? And, Ridley Scott said, hey, listen, we're just going to film it as it is. We're going to film the scene, and whatever we have to, I'll film it from as many different angles as I can get. And if we have to cut it down, we have to cut it down. But there's a chance that we might not have to cut it down. Maybe if we only keep certain shots for a certain amount of time, maybe they'll let us keep it. And the process of how they did that sequence with Ray Liotta with the green screen cap on, and then also doing the animatronic. Yeah, I can't tell. I mean, there might be a shot or two where I think I can tell the difference. But even Ray Liotta himself said, like, I've seen that scene several times, and I can't tell the difference between when they used the animatronic and when it was me. He's like, I honestly can't tell the difference of which is which. But that scene is awesome. I mean, it's fantastic. I can only imagine seeing that in the movie theater and imagining the audience reaction, especially when the brain goes on the pan. And then he just goes, that smells great.
Yeah, and oh my God, and just the use of the sound effects and even the use of Clarice hyperventilating in the background, where it's just like the minute he takes the part of the brain out and then he tosses it onto the pan, he's like, I really want water. I really want water right now. It's like, Clarice, I want water too, right now. Holy crap! Holy crap!
And then he feeds the brain to Credler, and then she just wants to throw up. She's like,
oh God! And I don't know why. I don't know why this shot also gets me as well too. When Clarice is in the back of the kitchen and Hannibal's still preparing Ray Liotta, and then all of a sudden you just see Ray Liotta's character just slowly just die, and then all of a sudden Hannibal just looks at him and throws a fucking towel over him as if he's freaking done. It's like, oh god, this is I don't know why, but even though Ray Liotta's character is such a piece of crap in the movie, you're just kind of like, oh, poor bastard. This is your ultimate end.
Yeah, no, he was corrupt too. Everybody in this movie is corrupt except for Clarice. Yeah, it's an amazing scene. It's an amazing finale. And yeah, like I said, I can't imagine what it would have been like to see it in a crowded movie theater on opening weekend. And also, like, special shout out to, like I said, the pursuit scene between the thief and Hannibal when he's trying to get the thumbprint on the bracelet so he can give it to Mason's guys, because they need verification that it really is him before they can wire him the portion of the money. But I also love the opening shootout with Evelda Drumgo's guys in the fish market, because that was actually pretty close to the book as well. I mean, the only thing I think they missed is having El Macarena in the background, because that was like very pronounced in the book.
Yeah.
I guess Thomas Harris had a thing for that song. So that's the only thing they didn't have in the background. But Ridley Scott, the way he shot it too, it's interesting because this movie came out first. It was almost kind of like a small tease as to how the battle sequences and the action sequences in Black Hawk Down were going to look later that year. Because, I mean, again, he carries the same team. Arthur Max did the productions design for both movies. I'm sure he had some of the guys doing the same sound effects. But I love that shootout as well, because I imagined it kind of like that in the book. Very vividly.
Yeah.
But tons of great moments in the movie. The opera is fantastic. Yeah. I absolutely love that. It's so short, but it's so well done, and the music is so beautiful, and it contrasts the mood of the scene. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a beautiful piece of music, and yet it's kind of tense because Potts is sitting there with his wife, and he's kind of like stalking Hannibal, or Hannibal stalking him rather. Yeah.
I mean, just watching that scene, there is such an utter feel of like the wolf among the sheep, just like literally just sitting there, not a care in the world whatsoever. In fact, you are his prey, or is it the other way around? And exactly. It's so great, and even just the slight little facial twitches that Anthony Hopkins portrays as Hannibal in that scene. It's just like, oh man, it's a sight to behold in that scene. Yeah,
absolutely. It's definitely one of the standouts to it. As brief as it is, it's still one of the standouts. But again, we talked about the ending, so we can kind of wrap it up here, because at the end of the day, I mean, the book and the movie are, I would say, 75% to each other. I think that's about a fair, maybe more, maybe 80%. But the ending is different.
Yes.
Now, you love these books. I mean, listen, I love Red Dragon. I love Silence of the Lambs. I loved Hannibal. I never read Hannibal Rising. But can you do me in the audience a favor, for those of us who are not as well versed in the books as you are, or in the lore as you are, even though I've read all three of them. Tell me your thoughts on the ending for the movie versus the ending of the book, because they are different.
It's one of those things where I sort of call it J.K. Rowling syndrome, because of the fact that there was not enough established in. I mean, Silence of the Lambs is a great book in itself, but they don't really delve into probably one of the biggest things about the Hannibal character, and it's his relationship with his sister, Misha. Yeah. And it's because of his relationship with his sister, Misha, watching her brutally get killed right in front of him and having her being force-fed to Hannibal Lecter. It's a big part of why he's a cannibal to begin with, because that cannibalism is his only link to his sister. So in terms of the arc for Hannibal as a character, he's trying to find his sister. He's trying to get her back in some way, shape, or form. And what ends up happening in the Hannibal novel is that Clarice gets half brainwashed by Hannibal. And he also just starts to see Clarice as, you know what? You are better than all these people that are over in the FBI. You don't need to be a part of them. Why don't you just come with me and we'll run off to frickin' Florence again and just screw the rest of the world. Let's be partners in crime on this. You're the only equal I can see in this world. You're the only person that was smart enough to catch me, and you're the only person that is willing to put their bullshit aside to basically see what the bigger picture is. And again, Hannibal's point of view is to eat the rude. So Clarice is the only person in years, apart from Will Graham, to basically see a connection with. And that, I think, is a much different ending for the book than it would be for the movie, because for the movie, you would need to build that up not only in Hannibal, but in Silence of the Lambs as well. And unfortunately, they ain't going in that realm. Introducing the Misha storyline would have kind of felt, it kind of would have felt superfluous in this film, I think. For the movie ending, that is kind of what you're kind of being dealt with at this point. And it's not as satisfying, but it's kind of the only way they could have gone with it, I think.
Sure. And, you know, there's other differences as well. I mean, they eliminated Mason's lesbian sister.
Margot.
Yeah, they eliminated Margot, and they eliminated the whole subplot about her wanting to have a child with her lover, and the way they are getting the semen out of Mason. They eliminated that for obvious reasons. The electric eel makes a cameo in the movie, but certainly not to the degree it does in the book.
Oh, God.
No, certainly not. Which, to be honest with you, I kind of wish we got that version of Mason's fate as opposed. I mean, listen, I love the way he goes in the movie. Don't get me wrong. I love the way he goes in the movie. I think getting devoured by pigs is kind of amazing.
Cardell?
Cardell. Yeah, it's satisfying. But still, the way he goes in the book is shocking, you might say.
That's one of the reasons why we got Brian Fuller's masterpiece of a TV series, Hannibal. So go check that out if you're craving.
Listen, I've watched the first season. I got to watch the others. I am guilty. I've watched the first season. I haven't watched the others.
It gets better.
Full disclosure.
Yes.
Just real quick, I don't know if they actually shot this and they deleted it, but I kind of wish they did keep this moment. Was towards the beginning of the book, when Clarice goes back to the Baltimore mental hospital where they kept Hannibal Lecter, and she goes there and it's abandoned, it's been closed down.
Mm-hmm.
And she just goes down there and it kind of like triggers the memories from Silence of the Lambs. I kind of really like that moment in the book. I thought it was kind of haunting and eerie and nostalgic. Again, I have no idea if they did film it and it just was deleted, but I kind of wish they did keep that moment in there. But
I think it was filmed, but Ridley Scott is one of those directors that he does not like to keep deleted scenes around. Like it's whatever's in front of you is meant to be in front of you, unless you're 20th Century Fox.
Yeah, well, still waiting on that 3.5-hour cut of Exodus, but whatever. At least we got the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven. Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, I really dug the book, and again, I mean, this is the underrated series, and the whole point we do these videos is to not only talk about our love for these movies that don't get enough acclaim or attention, but to kind of encourage others to go seek these movies out and give them, and if they have seen them already, give them a second chance. So, for those of you who have watched this review, this retrospective, if you will, and have seen the movie, but maybe haven't seen it in a while, go ahead and check it out again. It's worth checking out. It holds up 20 years later. It's the 20th anniversary, so no better time to check it out. And, you know, is it Silence of the Lambs? No, it's not. You can make the argument it was never going to top Silence of the Lambs. It's just Silence of the Lambs, just one of those lightning in a bottle achievements that are so rare. It's to try to replicate that a second time was just going to be, you know, damn near impossible. But all the same, the movie has a lot going for it, and the pros outweigh the cons substantially, in my opinion. So that's how I feel about it. What are your parting thoughts?
My parting thoughts on this is that this movie was, I mean, it was bashed critically and it was bashed by the audience, but in going forward in time, in terms of seeing what other content was coming out, I mean, after Hannibal Rising, it's kind of one of those films where it didn't need to exist, and it kind of made you look back on Hannibal, just regular Hannibal, and just be like, you know what? Maybe the story wasn't there, but the craft. Ridley Scott brought his all to that film. People are already salty about the fact that Jodie Foster was recast in the film, and it's one of those things where if a film has that much bad press going into it, that movie's going to have to do so much in terms of winning the audience over. And unfortunately, it didn't win the audience over then, but it's one of those films that you can look back on. You can just be like, you know what? This was a great chapter in the Hannibal trilogy, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Time has been very kind to it. I mean, it's stylish. It's, provocative. It's, it's still shocking.
Brutal. Brutal.
It's very brutal. The gore holds up incredibly well. Hans Zimmer's score is fantastic. I mean, it's does it kind of lose its way towards the end? You can make that argument. I mean, there's some people who really love the ending to the book and wish that was the ending they had filmed. I don't know how they would have been able to pull it off because to read it on the page is certainly different than to make it work on the screen.
But we got Hannibal feeding a brain to a child. So
and we got that killer final line. After all, as my mother told me, and as I'm sure your mother's told you, it's always important to try new things. And then the zoom into the eye, and then it's really, and then the opera music in the background as the credits roll. It's so different, but it's a solid movie. Demme, I'll go ahead and say this. I think it's a very, very good movie, if not a great movie. It keeps, every time I watch it, keeps getting better and better for me. And it's. Would I watch it over Silence of the Lambs? Again, no. Would I watch it over Manhunter? Probably. Mm-hmm. Would I watch it over Red Dragon? Probably. I mean, I like Manhunter and I like Red Dragon. Like them both.
Yeah.
But there's something unique about Hannibal. It is so different structurally from Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon. It just sets itself apart beautifully from the other two, I think.
Yeah, it's a chase film.
It is. And, and Anthony Hopkins hams it up a bit. But I kind of like that. I kind of like that his performance is different from the one we got in Silence.
It's unhinged because of the fact that he's out in the open. He doesn't need to restrain himself in any way whatsoever. And in terms of that, adding that to the character Hannibal, it only makes him even more dangerous and it only makes him even more unpredictable. I mean, there's so many scenes in the film where he's presenting himself as the art dealer and you wouldn't even get anything out of the normal out of him. Like, it's just like, oh, it's just another regular dude. You know what I mean? Another regular eccentric dude that probably has high taste, probably maybe up his own ass a little bit. And then you see him at night and you're just like, okay, oh yeah, no, this guy's pretty fucking scary. Like,
yeah, no, yes. Yeah, I do love that because you're absolutely right. He's free, he's out and about, and of course he's going to be a little bit more tongue-in-cheek and a little bit more playful with that because he's literally getting away with murder. Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds me of those documentaries I've watched on like guys like Ted Bundy and whatnot when they were kind of like out there and claiming they're innocent, just laughing and everything and whatnot. That's kind of how like Hannibal is in this. It's very sinister and very evil in a very charming way.
Yes.
But anyway, that'll do it for me on Ridley Scott's Hannibal. Again, for those of you who haven't seen it in a while, please check it out. For those of you who watched this review and haven't seen the movie, okay, I'd still check it out. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed our retrospective of Hannibal. I'm Steve Cravens. This is the Underrated Series. That's Andres Gallego, a.k.a. Galleghost. And we'll catch you next time. We're going to leave you with a scene from the movie and see you on the next one.
Take care, guys.
Bon appetit.
What was that? Cut out quickly.
Good evening, Clarice. Just like old times.
Shut up.
You look well.
If you touch me, I'll shoot you.
Understood.
Do right and live through this.
Spoken like a true Protestant. Better hurry. This might go faster if you hand me the knife. There was a third in the loft. No, Clarice. Behind me.
Shoot him! Get the gun and shoot him!
Go into the pan?
Yes!
Hey, Cordell! Why didn't you push him in? You can always say it was me.
Cordell?